next guest is no stranger to the TV screen. You can often see him on CNN, Fox, other stations talking about politics. Welcome, legal analyst Paul Henderson. How are you?
Great, thanks for having me.
And fourth generation San Franciscan, which is in itself a rarity.
I'm like a black unicorn right here on TV.
I'll remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's get right into it. The election of Donald Trump as president, what does that mean to communities of color? What does it mean to the gay community? And what does it mean to San Francisco? I mean, in your day job, you're the deputy chief of staff for the city and county of San Francisco, working for Mayor Lee.
I think on all of those fronts, it means that we all have a lot of work to do. We all now should be mobilizing. We all now should be coming to work together. We all now should be developing strategies in order to make sure not just that we are working together, but that we don't go backwards and that the rights that we've all fought for as a community don't erode, that they don't go away.
Right. I've seen you on TV many times, and you're great on the stump, and that's the right answer, and it's the answer you've given 5 times. But I want to know how you feel, and how did you feel when the election results came in on the 9th?
I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, like I had to scramble. Me, Paul Henderson, personally. Yeah. I felt like, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? I started becoming very concerned about future plans as they related to justice reforms. I became concerned about future plans as they related to LGBT rights, as they related to transgender rights. I became immediately concerned about the judiciary. Obviously, it's something that I have real concerns about. And the administration will have a direct impact on. And that is going to be very significant, I think, in the next not just few years, but in the next decade. Right.
Now, you work for a chief executive for the mayor of the city of county of San Francisco, who's been a guest on our show, Mayor Ed Lee. You know...
Big fan of the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. It's difficult to balance sometimes personal feelings with your job leading a city. It's difficult sometimes to balance your personal feelings with being someone who works for a city.
Yeah.
How bad was this election for us?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways of looking at it. So there's a national election, there's a state election, and there's a local election. And I think you really have to look at all three almost separately because people get really frustrated and they feel some kind of way and they tend to lump them all together, and they're really not. And just to put it in context for you, I always like to tell people, when they feel like, well, maybe my vote isn't even mattering. Because when I watch the screen and I see how other states are voting, I feel like...
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't get any bluer than California.
It doesn't necessarily get any bluer than California, and people tend to feel like their votes are more like sand on a beach. But really, when you talk about state issues and local issues, your votes are like pounds on a scale. It really does matter, and they're magnified, and those things drive the agenda. To the degree you are in a county in California, that influences what's going to happen in this state. And to the degree you are in a state like California, that influences what's going to happen throughout the rest of the nation. So it all still matters. We all still have to be at the table, and we all still have to participate. And it's frustrating to me, I think, when people have a perspective that their voice doesn't matter or it doesn't count as much when it absolutely does. People just need to be aware of that, specifically when we're talking about communities of color and disenfranchised communities whom we really need at the table to make sure that their voices get heard and their presence gets counted.
Right. What was the ugliest thing you think Donald Trump said during the campaign? One of those moments when you just went, wow, I can't believe that one just came out of his mouth.
My biggest concern is the lack of reverence and the lack of respect for the process that we have built in this country that preserves the rights of others. And to me, his comments reflect an unawareness or an indifference to communities that he does not represent and doesn't seem to care about as much because of his comments. And I think that that's really important. We are measured by how we treat the most disenfranchised. The fact that part of his platform seems to embrace an approach that does not take an inclusive approach is, I think, a very dangerous thing. And that's what's very disappointing to me. And I know that his own perspective is probably very different from mine. But in terms of leadership, I expect a leader to come to a table like President of the United States with an inclusive attitude and an inclusive approach. And that's not what we've heard in terms of the rhetoric. And that's not where he's been for a very long time. You know, I've been following Trump since 2008, 2009, when I was writing with Politico, talking about how dangerous his comments have been in terms of marginalizing the LGBT community, communities of color, making racist comments, and the impact of those statements would be what they would be on the party itself, in terms of having them either put him in check or make statements so that they did not become adoptive admissions by the rest of the party. I have real concerns about many of the things that he said for a very long time.
Do you think Donald Trump is a racist, and do you think the platform of the Republican Party is racist?
It depends on how you define racist. I think the direction that he's taking his leadership in is going to be one that's going to be non-inclusive, and that in and of itself can have racist overtones, because the leadership will diminish or despair the rights of others. That's a real problem from someone like myself that obviously is a person of color and obviously comes from several disenfranchised communities with a tradition of having their rights marginalized in this country. This is not the direction that the country needs to go in my opinion, in order to move forward and to move ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't change things. My real concern is when we try and evaluate where we're headed as a country and where we're headed as a nation with leadership like Donald Trump, it's not so much that throughout his campaign he ever proposed a lot of inclusionary ideas, specifically speaking to race or the LGBT community, but beyond just not building out a platform that was going to defend, protect, or increase those rights, he is building out leadership around him that has a specific history of undermining those exact rights. And that's my concern.
Yeah, two specific items that have gotten a lot of attention, and people have talked about it. Are we going to keep Roe v. Wade under a Donald Trump administration?
I don't think we will keep Roe v. Wade, and to the degree we keep it, it will not look the same, and let me explain. So to the degree we continue to have abortion rights, they will be challenged and marginalized by legal challenges that are going up the chain, ultimately leading to decisions that will be heard at the Supreme Court.
So we're not going to have a Roe v. Wade thrown out sort of case before the Supremes in the first quarter of 2017?
I don't know that we'll have that. I certainly hope not, but I think we will have challenges that water down those rights and that diminish the rights that exist as we know them now. And I think the same thing is going to exist for traditional marriage. I think the same thing is going to exist for voting rights. And we've already seen that be watered down. We've already seen those attacks, and we've already seen those challenges expand or diminish the rights that have existed in the past based on previous rulings and previous administrations.
So what about marriage equality? Is that safe?
It depends on how you define safe. I hate to give you the legal answer, but define safe.
No, you're a legal analyst.
So, exactly.
I want the juice.
So I think the safe is going to be diminished. I think you're going to see a return in terms of marriage now, instead of being a national conversation and a line in the sand defining what those rights are, a reversion to states being able to interpret what traditional marriage has been.
Can that happen in light of the
ruling?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it can happen because there are areas that have not been decided yet that are still being decided in terms of what national marriage and marriage equality looks like. So throughout the campaign, Mr. Trump has said that he believes in traditional marriages, and he believes that marriage should be determined by the individual states.
But on 60 Minutes, he said that it's settled law.
Exactly. That's exactly what he said. And here's the thing. So in the areas that have not been decided yet in terms of marriage, if the states are allowed to interpret how those rights are defined, they will be defined in ways, or could be defined in ways, that defend and support a traditional interpretation of marriage rather than the national interpretation of marriage. And I'll give you some examples.
We've only got about 10 seconds.
Okay. Things like adoption, things like if you're sick and who's going to care for you, things about transitioning your property.
So this may all come up
rights.
under a Trump administration.
Absolutely. I expect them to come up under the Trump administration.
Thank you, Paul. I'm hoping we're going to have you back after January 21st to talk about the impact of the incoming Trump administration. Thanks
I look
for
forward
being
to
on
it.
the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. I'm David Perry. This has been 10%. Tune in next week.